I'm Amber Sullivan, 28 years old, and yesterday was supposed to be my wedding rehearsal. Instead, I stood in an empty venue watching staff pack up chairs while my phone remained silent. My fiancé Jason and his entire family simply didn't show up. As tears streamed down my face, my grandfather Martin, the man who raised me after my parents died, squeezed my hand and whispered, "Come home, sweetheart." Back at our house, he disappeared into his study and returned with a weathered envelope. "Your mother wrote this before she died," he said. "I've been saving it for this exact moment. If you're watching this from somewhere with a good cup of coffee in hand, I'd love to know where. Drop a comment below, hit the like button, and subscribe to join me as I share how this letter completely changed the course of my life. Life hasn't always been kind to me. When I was 10 years old, my parents Thomas and Marie Sullivan died in a car accident coming home from their anniversary dinner. In one rainy night, I lost everything I knew. Everything except Grandpa Martin. My grandfather stepped up without hesitation. He was already in his 60s then, a retired carpenter with gentle hands and infinite patience. He moved into my parents' small Connecticut home to keep my life as stable as possible. We learned to navigate grief together, him teaching me how to channel sadness into creativity, how to remember without drowning in memories. "Your mother had your same laugh," he'd tell me. "And your father, well, he had that same crinkle between your eyebrows when you're thinking too hard." I threw myself into school, finding solace in learning and eventually pursuing education as my career path. Teaching second grade became my passion. There's something magical about witnessing young minds connect dots and discover their capabilities. My classroom at Pine Grove Elementary became my sanctuary, a place where I felt completely myself. That's probably why I never prioritized dating. Between my students, my close circle of friends, and weekend fishing trips with Grandpa, my heart felt full. Until Jason Thompson walked into the school charity auction I was organizing. Jason stood out immediately, tall, with perfectly styled dark hair and a confident smile that seemed to part the crowd. As the marketing executive for a prestigious finance company, he had come to expand the company's community footprint, as he explained. But after outbidding everyone for a quilt my students had made, he asked for my number instead of the tax receipt. Our romance moved quickly. Jason was charming, decisive, and seemed completely smitten with me. Within 3 months, we were spending every weekend together. By 6 months, he was talking about our future. At 8 months, during a weekend trip to Newport, he proposed with a diamond ring that felt impossibly heavy on my finger. "It's stunning," I had whispered, though something in me wondered if it was a bit too large. A bit too flashy for a teacher who spent her days with finger paint and construction paper. "Only the best for you," Jason had replied, kissing my forehead. "We need to show everyone you're spoken for." Looking back, I should have noticed the subtle red flags that were already waving. The way Jason would frown at my simple sundresses, eventually replacing them with designer clothes he'd purchase without consulting me. How he'd check my spending, suggesting I create a budget spreadsheet to review with him monthly. The frequency with which he'd intercept invitations from my friends, telling me we had better options for our weekends. "Don't you think your friends from college are a bit limited in their worldview?" he'd ask after meeting them. "I just want to expand your horizons, introduce you to people who can further your life." Jason's family was cut from the same expensive cloth. His mother Diana was a former beauty queen who maintained her pageant posture and practiced smile. His father Gerald rarely spoke directly to me, usually communicating through questions directed at Jason about his teacher. His sister Kimberly, an executive like her brother, always managed to mention the price of whatever she'd recently purchased within minutes of any conversation. Their subtle disapproval of me was evident in the questions they'd ask. "And you're satisfied with just teaching? No ambitions for administration?" Diana would probe. "Your grandfather raised you?" "How character building that must have been," was another favorite. Always delivered with a sympathetic head tilt. Grandpa Martin noticed their behavior immediately. After our first dinner with them, he sat quietly in his recliner, watching me flutter around excitedly. "They seem nice, don't they?" I prompted, desperate for his approval. "They seem wealthy," he replied carefully. But money and niceness aren't necessarily roommates, Amber. I brushed off his concerns. They're just different from us. Jason loves me for exactly who I am. Grandpa nodded. But I caught the worry in his eyes. I just want you to be with someone who adds to your happiness, not someone who makes you question it. Love conquers all, right? I said with forced brightness. Love should never need to conquer the person you're with, he answered quietly. I threw myself into wedding planning, or rather, into agreeing with the plans Diana Thompson orchestrated. The small garden ceremony I'd imagined transformed into an extravaganza at Lakeview Manor, the most exclusive venue in Connecticut. My simple wildflower bouquet concept became an imported floral arrangement. My dress budget tripled, then quadrupled. This is our chance to introduce you properly to society, Diana explained while dismissing yet another of my suggestions. Trust me, you'll thank us later. And I smiled and nodded, telling myself this was just pre-wedding stress, that everything would settle once we were actually married. I ignored the growing knot in my stomach each time I had to explain to Grandpa Martin why another of my original wedding ideas had been scrapped. I dismissed the anxiety that built as my wedding turned into something I barely recognized. It's just one day, I told myself repeatedly. What matters is our life together afterward. But as the wedding approached, I found myself wondering exactly what that life would look like and whether I would recognize myself in it. I woke up on the morning of our rehearsal with butterflies dancing in my stomach. In just 24 hours, we would have the rehearsal dinner, and then the next day, I would become Mrs. Jason Thompson. I spent extra time on my appearance, using the expensive makeup products Jason had gifted me, styling my hair the way his mother had subtly suggested, photographed better. My small bridal party consisted of just 3 people, my best friend Sarah, who I'd known since elementary school, and 2 colleagues from school who had become close friends. While Diana had pushed for me to include Kimberly and 2 of Jason's cousins, I had finally put my foot down on this one detail. I want people who really know me standing beside me, I had insisted. One of the few times I hadn't immediately capitulated to their wishes. As I finished getting ready, Grandpa Martin knocked on my bedroom door. Though we still lived together in my childhood home, he was always respectful of my space. My girl, he said, his voice catching slightly when he saw me. You look beautiful. Just like your mother did. He crossed the room and handed me a small box. Inside was a delicate silver bracelet with a single pearl. This was hers, he explained. She wore it on her wedding day. Said it was her something old, and that she wanted you to have it someday. I blinked back tears as he fastened it around my wrist. I wish she could see you, he said softly. Me too, I whispered. We drove to Lakeview Manor together, arriving precisely at the scheduled 3 o'clock rehearsal time. The venue coordinator greeted us warmly, leading us to the grand ballroom where rows of chairs faced an elaborate flower arch. The groom's party hasn't arrived yet, she noted, checking her watch. But we can get started with positioning your side when they get here. My friends arrived minutes later, Sarah immediately hugging me tight enough to momentarily calm my nerves. You okay? She asked, studying my face with the kind of attention that comes from 2 decades of friendship. Just nervous, I replied. Jason had an important client meeting this morning. They must be running late. But as 3:30 approached with no sign of Jason, his family, or the groomsmen, the butterflies in my stomach transformed into a heavy weight. I called his cell phone repeatedly, each call going straight to voicemail. I texted both him and Kimberly, messages showing as delivered but unanswered. At 4 o'clock, the venue coordinator approached with a sympathetic smile. Would you like to start without them? We could at least walk through your processional. Before I could answer, my phone dinged. A text from Jason. Something came up. Can't make rehearsal. See you tomorrow. I stared at the screen, reading and rereading the brief message. No explanation. No apology. Just 9 words dismissing an event we'd planned for months. Amber? Sarah touched my arm gently. What is it? I showed her the message, watching her expression shift from concern to anger. That's it. Something came up? What could possibly be more important than your wedding rehearsal? I had no answer. The venue staff began discreetly removing chairs while my small group of supporters exchanged uncomfortable glances. The humiliation washed over me in waves as I imagined them pitying poor Amber, who couldn't even get her fiancé to show up. "Let's go home," Grandpa Martin finally said, his weathered hand steady on my shoulder. "Nothing more to do here today." The drive home passed in silence, tears streaming down my face as I stared out the window. Each mile increased my confusion and hurt. By the time we pulled into our driveway, my makeup was ruined and my carefully styled hair had fallen flat. Inside, I collapsed onto our worn living room sofa, the same one where I'd cried after nightmares as a child. Grandpa didn't hover or push me to talk. Instead, he went to the kitchen and returned with 2 mugs of tea, placing mine on the coffee table before sitting in his recliner. "I don't understand," I finally said, my voice small. "How could he just not show up?" Grandpa sipped his tea thoughtfully. "People reveal themselves in many ways, Amber. Sometimes it's in what they say. Sometimes it's in what they don't say." He paused, setting down his mug. "And sometimes it's in who they leave waiting." He rose slowly and left the room. I heard his footsteps on the stairs, then the creak of the attic ladder. When he returned, he was carrying a small wooden box I'd never seen before, its surface polished by years of handling. "I've been wondering when the right time would be for this," he said, sitting beside me. "I think maybe it's now." Grandpa Martin placed the wooden box carefully on the coffee table between us. It was beautifully crafted, with intricate carvings of flowers around the edges that I recognized as my grandfather's handiwork. "I made this box for your mother when she turned 16, he explained, running his fingers over the carved petals. "She used it for her most precious things." He opened the lid and removed a cream-colored envelope, yellowed slightly with age. My name was written on the front in elegant handwriting I didn't recognize, but somehow knew immediately. "Your mother wrote this letter to you about a month before the accident," Grandpa explained, his voice gentle. "She asked me to keep it safe and give it to you on your wedding day." He placed it in my trembling hands. "I know that's tomorrow, technically, but I think she'd want you to read it now." The envelope was sealed with wax, a small flower pressed into the dark red circle. I traced my finger over it, overwhelmed by the thought that my mother had touched this very paper, sealed it with her own hands. "She used to press flowers from the garden," Grandpa said, watching me. "Always said that beauty should be preserved." With extreme care, I broke the seal and removed several pages of delicate stationery. The moment I unfolded them, the faintest scent of lavender reached me, my mother's favorite, Grandpa had always told me. The sight of her handwriting made my breath catch. These graceful loops and curves had flowed from her pen while she was thinking of me, imagining a future day when I would be old enough to marry. I blinked back tears and began to read. "My dearest Amber, asterisk if you're reading this, you're about to get married, and I'm sitting somewhere nearby, probably crying happy tears and embarrassing you terribly. At least, that's my plan. I'm writing this as you sleep down the hall, just 10 years old and still convinced boys are totally gross. The thought of you as a grown woman, in love and ready to begin your own family, fills me with such joy and wonder, asterisk. Asterisk, but if life has taught me anything, it's that we can't predict its twists and turns. So I'm writing this letter just in case I'm not there to tell you these things in person, asterisk. Asterisk first, I want you to know that marrying your father was the best decision I ever made. Thomas Sullivan stole my heart the moment he quoted Emily Dickinson in our college literature class. He wasn't the wealthiest or most conventionally impressive suitor, much to my parents' dismay, but he looked at me like I was magic, and he never once asked me to be anyone other than exactly who I am. Asterisk. Asterisk, which brings me to the reason for this letter. Marriage, sweet girl, is a daily choice. It's choosing the same person over and over, through frustrations and joys, growth and change. The person you choose should be someone who sees your authentic self and cherishes it, who encourages your growth rather than directing it. Asterisk. Asterisk, your father and I faced significant challenges early in our marriage. His family comes from old money and old expectations. They wanted a different kind of wife for their son, someone from their social circle who understood their traditions. They made it abundantly clear that a florist's daughter from a middle-class family wasn't their first choice. Asterisk. Asterisk. For a while, I tried desperately to become what they wanted. I changed my clothes, my opinions, even the way I spoke. Your father watched me disappear bit by bit until one day, he packed our bags and we left his family estate. I didn't fall in love with the woman they want. He told me. I fell in love with you. Asterisk. Asterisk. We struggled financially at first, giving up his inheritance to build our own life. But we were happy in a way money could never buy. That tiny apartment above Mrs. Hudson's garage was more of a home than the Thompson mansion ever was, because we were truly ourselves within those walls. Asterisk. Asterisk. I don't know what kind of man you'll choose, my darling girl. But I hope he's someone who loves the real you, not a version he's trying to create. I hope he values your mind and your heart above your appearance or connections. I hope he's brave enough to stand beside you, even when it's difficult. Asterisk. Asterisk. Now for something practical. Inside this box, your grandfather will find a small velvet pouch. It contains jewelry that has been in my family for generations, pieces I inherited from my grandmother and great-grandmother. The pearl earrings are particularly special to me. I wore them on my wedding day as my something old. Perhaps they'll be yours as well. Asterisk. Asterisk. There's also a sapphire ring that's quite valuable, though its true worth is in its history. My grandmother used it during the Depression to start over when they lost everything. She always said it represented resilience and new beginnings. If you ever need either, it's yours to use. Asterisk. Asterisk. Trust your instincts, Amber. They'll rarely lead you astray. Remember that true love doesn't diminish you, it expands you. It doesn't blur your edges, it defines them more clearly. And perhaps most importantly, it doesn't require you to be perfect, it embraces your imperfections as part of the unique masterpiece that is you. Asterisk. Asterisk. I love you more than words can express. Whether I'm standing beside you tomorrow or watching from somewhere beyond, know that I am infinitely proud of the woman you've become. Asterisk. All my love, Mom. I lowered the letter to my lap, tears flowing freely down my face. For several minutes, I couldn't speak, could barely breathe. The words had reached across time like a lifeline, my mother's voice suddenly so clear in my mind. Grandpa sat quietly beside me, his own eyes glistening. She was so wise, he finally said. Your mother could always see the heart of things. I read the letter again, certain phrases jumping out with painful clarity. Someone who loves the real you, not a version he's trying to create. True love doesn't diminish you, it expands you. When I finished, I looked up at my grandfather. Did you know what it said? He shook his head. She sealed it right after writing it. But knowing Marie, I can imagine. She had remarkable insight about people. She talks about Dad's family. I never knew they disapproved of her. Grandpa nodded slowly. The Sullivans were old money, very concerned with lineage and connections. Your father chose love over inheritance. Never regretted it for a moment. She mentions jewelry, I said, remembering that part of the letter. Grandpa reached into the wooden box again and removed a small dark blue velvet pouch. It's all here, just as she left it. I carefully emptied the contents onto the coffee table. A pair of perfect pearl earrings, a delicate gold chain with a small diamond pendant, and a stunning sapphire ring surrounded by tiny diamonds. The sapphire was your great-grandmother's, Grandpa explained. She sold it during the Depression to buy the store that eventually became your grandmother's successful business. Years later, she was able to buy it back. I picked up the ring, turning it in the light. Mom said it represented resilience and new beginnings. That it does, Grandpa agreed. Your mother was planning to give you these pieces on your wedding day. She wanted you to have tangible connections to the strong women in your family. I slipped the sapphire ring onto my finger, a perfect fit, as though it had been waiting for me all along. Its weight felt entirely different from my engagement diamond. This was a comforting presence rather than a showy burden. Thank you for keeping these safe, I whispered, leaning against my grandfather's shoulder. And for knowing when I needed to read this. He put his arm around me. Your mother's words always had power. I figured they might help light your path right about now. As I clutched the letter to my chest, I felt something shifting inside me, recognition dawning, clarity emerging through the fog of confusion and hurt. My mother's wisdom had traveled across time to reach me at the exact moment I needed it most. After reading my mother's letter, I couldn't sleep. I sat in the window seat of my bedroom, the same one where I daydreamed as a teenager, and watched the moon track across the night sky. The sapphire ring glinted on my finger, catching moonlight as I turned my hand this way and that. I pulled out a box of photographs from beneath my bed. Images of Jason and me stared back, our first vacation in the Hamptons. The charity gala where he'd introduced me to his business associates, the day we toured Lakeview Manor as a potential wedding venue. In almost every photo, I noticed something I hadn't seen before. The way I seemed to be holding myself slightly differently than in older pictures. How my smile looked rehearsed rather than natural. The careful way I was always positioned slightly behind Jason, as though taking up less space. I found a photo from before we met, a camping trip with Sarah and our friends from college. In it, I was laughing wildly, hair messy, clothes rumpled, eyes bright with genuine joy. I hardly recognized that version of myself. I began to catalog moments that had felt off but that I'd dismissed. Jason surprising me with a complete wardrobe refresh after commenting that my teacher clothes weren't appropriate for his future wife. The way he'd check my phone casually, explaining he was just seeing who called. How he'd suggested I scale back my volunteer work because we need to prioritize our relationship. Just last month, he'd convinced me to decline a professional development opportunity, a summer curriculum design workshop I'd been excited about, because it conflicted with a vacation he'd planned with his college friends. "You don't need more career development, Amber," he'd said. "You're just going to be working a few more years anyway, until we start our family." We'd never discussed children on that timeline. In fact, I'd always been clear about wanting to continue my career even after becoming a mother. But somehow, our future had been decided without my input. As midnight approached, my phone rang. Jason's name appeared on the screen. I answered after several rings, my heart pounding. "Finally," he said, his voice tight. "I've been trying to reach you. My phone's been right here." I replied quietly. "You sent one text message hours ago." "We had an emergency meeting with Hartwell Industries," he explained, sounding impatient. "Potential 8-figure account. Surely you understand that takes precedence over a wedding rehearsal." "It's just walking practice." "Walking practice," I repeated. "For our wedding. The most important day of our lives, supposedly." He sighed heavily. "Don't be dramatic, Amber. The actual wedding is what matters, and I'll be there. The rehearsal is just a formality." "Where are you now?" I asked. A slight pause. "Wrapping up dinner with the clients." In the background, I could hear music and laughter, not the sounds of a business dinner ending, but of a celebration in full swing. "Sounds like a serious business meeting," I observed. "We're closing the deal," he snapped. "Look, I don't have time to justify myself to you right now. You're being completely unreasonable." Something in me shifted, like a key turning in a lock. "No, Jason. I'm being completely reasonable for the first time in our relationship. You didn't miss the rehearsal for a meeting. You chose something else over our wedding preparation and didn't even have the decency to tell me the truth. You don't understand how these things work," he said, his tone condescending. "My career, my connections, they benefit both of us. Sometimes sacrifices have to be made." Yes, I agreed. But they're always my sacrifices, aren't they? My friends, my style. My career aspirations, my wedding vision. "What exactly have you sacrificed, Jason?" His voice hardened. "I'm not having this conversation right now. You're clearly emotional and not thinking clearly. We'll talk tomorrow when you've calmed down." "I'm actually thinking more clearly than I have in months," I replied. "Do you even want to marry me, Jason? The real me, not the version you've been trying to create." "What are you talking about?" "Of course I do. I proposed, didn't I? You proposed to someone you thought you could mold into the perfect corporate wife. But that's not who I am." "Amber," he started, but I cut him off. "I need to go. Unlike you, I'm where I'm supposed to be, at home, preparing for what I thought would be the most important day of my life." I ended the call before he could respond. My hands trembling, but my mind strangely calm. For the first time in our relationship, I had spoken my truth without filtering it through the lens of what Jason wanted to hear. My phone immediately lit up with incoming texts. "You're overreacting. This isn't like you. My mother is concerned about your behavior." Each message confirmed what my heart already knew. Jason wasn't concerned about my feelings, he was worried about losing control of the narrative of me. I turned back to the photo box and dug deeper, finding pictures from my childhood. There was one of my mother holding me on her lap, both of us laughing at something out of frame. I studied her face, seeing my own features reflected back, the same wide-set eyes, the same slight dimple in the left cheek. "I wish you were here," I whispered to her image. "But in a way, you are." I reread her letter, the paper now soft from multiple handlings. The words about her relationship with my father struck me particularly hard this time. How she had tried to change herself to please his family. How my father had recognized what was happening and chosen love over expectation and inheritance. Jason had never once stood up for me against his family's subtle criticisms. Instead, he had joined them in their project of improving me. Around 2 in the morning, I heard a soft knock at my door. Grandpa Martin stood there in his robe, 2 mugs of hot chocolate in hand. "Thought you might still be up," he said. "Mind some company?" I made room for him on the window seat, accepting the warm mug gratefully. "I found her," I said after a moment. "The girl I used to be. I think I've been losing her bit by bit." Grandpa nodded. "I've noticed." Wasn't sure if I should say anything. Marriage is such a personal choice. "Why didn't you tell me more about Mom and Dad's struggle with his family?" He sipped his hot chocolate thoughtfully. "Some lessons we have to learn ourselves. And some stories aren't mine to tell." He gestured to the letter. "That's why she wrote that. She knew there might be things you'd need to hear directly from her." "Did you know about the jewelry?" "I did. Your mother asked me to keep it safe until your wedding day. The sapphire especially, it meant a great deal to her." I twisted the ring on my finger. "She said it represented resilience and new beginnings." "That it does." He set down his mug. "Amber, I need to tell you something. I've been keeping a record of things I've observed with Jason. Nothing intrusive, just notes about patterns I've noticed. Things that concerned me." He reached into his robe pocket and pulled out a small notebook. "I wasn't sure if I'd ever show you this. Didn't want to interfere. But given today's events." He handed me the notebook. Inside were dated entries in my grandfather's neat handwriting. March 15th. Jason criticized Amber's dress choice for dinner. 3rd time this week he's made negative comment about her appearance. April 2nd. Amber canceled book club again. Says Jason had surprise plans. 2nd monthly meeting she's missed. April 18th. Jason checked Amber's phone while she was in kitchen. Not first time I've observed this. May 7th. Amber apologized 11 times during dinner with Jason. Counted each one. She never used to apologize for expressing opinions. There were dozens more entries. Small moments I dismissed or hadn't even registered, compiled into a disturbing pattern when viewed together. "I hope you'll forgive an old man for keeping notes," Grandpa said quietly. "I promised your parents I'd look after you." Wasn't sure how else to track what I was seeing. I closed the notebook, my throat tight with emotion. "Thank you," I whispered. "For paying attention. For caring enough to notice." "Your mother would have noticed too," he said. She had a gift for seeing beneath the surface of things. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the moon disappear behind clouds. "Whatever you decide about tomorrow," Grandpa finally said, "I'm with you. All the way." For the first time since the disastrous rehearsal, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. The path ahead wasn't clear yet, but I was no longer lost. I must have finally fallen asleep in the early morning hours, because I woke to bright sunlight streaming through my curtains. For one disoriented moment, I thought it was an ordinary day. Then reality crashed back. This was my wedding day. Or it was supposed to be. I checked my phone. 7 missed calls from Jason, 3 from his mother, and numerous texts demanding I call immediately. I set the phone aside without responding and went downstairs. Grandpa was in the kitchen making pancakes, his traditional weekend breakfast. The normality of the scene, him in his worn flannel robe, humming while flipping pancakes, brought unexpected tears to my eyes. "Good morning," he said, sliding a plate toward me. "Thought you could use your favorite breakfast today." I sat at our kitchen table, the same one where I'd done homework as a child, and realized with sudden clarity that this home represented something Jason's grand house never had: unconditional acceptance. "Thank you," I said, meaning for far more than pancakes. We ate in comfortable silence until the doorbell rang. Grandpa and I exchanged glances. "I'll get it," he said, rising from the table. I heard voices in the entryway, Jason's clipped tones, a woman's higher pitch that could only be Diana Thompson, and my grandfather's measured responses. Then footsteps approached the kitchen. Jason entered first, immaculately dressed in designer casual wear, his expression a careful mask of concern. Diana followed, her critical gaze sweeping the modest kitchen. "Amber," Jason said, stepping toward me. "You haven't been answering your phone. We've been worried." I remained seated, oddly calm. I needed time to think. "Think? About what?" He frowned. "We're getting married in 8 hours." "Are we?" I asked quietly. Diana interjected, placing her designer handbag on our counter with a grimace, as though worried about contamination. "Of course you are. Everything's arranged. The florists are already at the venue, and the coordinator's been calling me all morning for final decisions." "Final decisions about my wedding that no one consulted me about?" I asked. Jason's eyes narrowed slightly. "Amber, what's going on? This isn't like you." "Actually, this is exactly like me. The real me. The one that's been getting lost in this relationship." Diana made an impatient sound. "We don't have time for philosophical discussions. Jason, tell her we need to get moving. The hair and makeup team is waiting at the hotel suite." "Why did you miss the rehearsal yesterday?" I asked, looking directly at Jason. He sighed. "I told you. Emergency client meeting. With Hartwell Industries," I specified. "8-figure potential account, right?" "Yes," he confirmed, a flash of irritation crossing his face. "I've been chasing them for months. When Albert Hartwell suggests a meeting, you don't reschedule." "Interesting." I pulled out my phone and opened the social media app. "Because Kimberly posted this last night during your emergency meeting." I turned the screen toward them, showing a photo Kimberly had shared: Jason, his parents, and several friends at the Thompson Family Country Club's annual gala. The caption read, *Annual Founders Ball. Best networking night of the year, *. Diana recovered first. The Hartwells were at the gala. Jason was multitasking business and social obligations. "You chose a networking event over our wedding rehearsal," I stated flatly. "And instead of telling me the truth, you lied." "I made a judgment call," Jason said defensively. "The Founders Ball is the most important social event in our circle. The Hartwells never RSVP, they just appear. When we saw them arrive, Dad insisted I stay to make connections." "And you couldn't have called to explain that? You sent a 9-word text after leaving me waiting for over an hour." "I knew you'd be emotional about it," he said, his tone maddeningly reasonable. "Women tend to overreact about wedding details. I figured it was better to handle it in person today." The condescension in his voice made something snap inside me. "Wedding details? You think the rehearsal was about centerpieces and seating arrangements? It was about committing to each other. About showing up when you say you will." Diana stepped forward, her patience clearly exhausted. "Amber, you're being ridiculous. Sometimes in our social circle, sacrifices must be made for advancement. The fact that you don't understand that only highlights how unprepared you are for the life Jason is offering you." "Unprepared?" I repeated. "Or unwilling to disappear into the version of me you've been trying to create?" "No one's trying to change you," Jason insisted, though his eyes shifted away from mine. "We've been helping you adapt to a different social environment. By criticizing my clothes, my friends, my career? By checking my phone and scheduling my time? By dismissing the things that matter to me." Diana's perfectly maintained facade cracked slightly. "If you'd had a proper upbringing, these adjustments wouldn't be necessary. But given your Circumstances, she glanced dismissively around our kitchen. We've had to expedite your social education. Grandpa, who had been leaning against the doorframe observing silently, straightened. Mrs. Thompson, I suggest you reconsider your next words very carefully. I meant no offense, she said insincerely. But surely you recognize that Amber's background is quite different from ours. The Thompsons have certain standards. Standards that apparently don't include basic respect or honesty, I interrupted, rising from my chair. I've been trying so hard to fit into your world that I nearly lost myself in the process. I twisted the large diamond engagement ring off my finger and placed it on the table between us. I can't marry you, Jason. His confident expression faltered. You don't mean that. You're upset about the rehearsal, understandably, but you're overreacting. I'm not. I'm finally seeing clearly. I touched the sapphire ring on my other hand. My mother wrote me a letter before she died about choosing someone who loves the real me, not a version they're trying to create. She faced the same pressure from my father's wealthy family that I've been facing from yours. The difference is, my father chose her over their expectations. You've consistently chosen your family's expectations over me. This is absurd, Diana snapped. Do you have any idea how much this wedding has cost us? The social implications of canceling on the day of the event. Is that really your concern right now? Grandpa asked quietly. The social implications? Not your son's happiness or Amber's well-being. Jason stepped closer to me, lowering his voice to the persuasive tone he used when closing business deals. Amber, every couple has pre-wedding jitters. Let's not make any hasty decisions. Come with us to the hotel. Get ready with the bridesmaids. We can talk more there. There's nothing more to discuss, I said firmly. I won't marry someone who sees me as a project to be perfected rather than a person to be loved. His expression hardened. You realize what you're giving up, right? The house we've picked out? The lifestyle? The connections? Teaching second grade in this little town isn't exactly a promising future. And there it was, the confirmation that he had never valued my career, my community, my life as it was. I love teaching second grade in this little town, I said. I love my modest house and my real friends. I love who I am when I'm not trying to meet your impossible standards. Diana's face flushed with anger. After everything we've invested in this relationship, in you. Invested? I repeated. Is that how you see relationships? As investments with expected returns? Don't be naive, she snapped. Of course they are. And you're making a foolish choice walking away from what Jason offers. I disagree, I said calmly. I think I'm saving myself from years of slowly disappearing. Jason's expression changed, the mask of concern dropping completely. If you do this, there's no coming back. I won't be made a fool of. I'm not trying to make a fool of you, Jason. I'm trying to be honest, something we should have been with each other all along. You'll regret this, he said coldly. Good luck finding someone else willing to take on your situation. He gestured vaguely around our home. My situation? I asked. You mean my loving home? My fulfilling career? My authentic self? Grandpa stepped forward then, something small in his hand. I think it's time for you both to leave. We're not finished here, Diana began, but Grandpa held up his hand. Yes, you are, he said firmly. And just so we're clear about what's happened here today. He held up a small digital recorder. I've been documenting concerning patterns in your behavior toward my granddaughter for some time. Today's conversation is part of that record. Jason's face paled. You've been recording us? That's illegal. Actually, Grandpa said mildly, Connecticut is a one-party consent state for recordings. And since I'm part of this conversation, I'm that one party. I'm not planning to do anything with this recording, unless you decide to make things difficult for Amber. Financial threats, social sabotage, professional interference, any of that would give me reason to share these recordings with people you might prefer not hear them. Diana gasped. Are you threatening us? Not at all. Grandpa replied. I'm protecting my granddaughter, just as I promised her parents I would. Now, I suggest you both leave and begin making whatever arrangements are necessary to cancel today's event. Jason stared at me, a mixture of anger and disbelief on his face. For a moment, I thought he might argue further. Instead, he turned abruptly and headed for the door. Diana following after snatching up her handbag. At the threshold, Jason paused and looked back. "You'll regret this, Amber. Nobody walks away from a Thompson." As the door closed behind them, I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. The house seemed suddenly quieter, the air clearer. "You recorded them?" I asked Grandpa. He smiled slightly, showing me the device. Old digital recorder I used for bird calls. Started carrying it after I noticed Jason's controlling behavior escalating. "Never know when evidence might come in handy." He set it on the counter. Don't worry, I was bluffing about Connecticut being a one-party state for recordings. But they don't need to know that. For the first time in what felt like forever, I laughed, a genuine, unfiltered sound that filled our kitchen. And, just like that, on what should have been my wedding day, I felt the first stirrings of freedom. The hours after Jason and Diana left were a blur of phone calls and messages. I asked Sarah to help spread the word that the wedding was canceled, while Grandpa contacted the venue. To my surprise, when the manager at Lakeview Manor heard my situation, she offered to refund the deposit, something their contract specifically stated was non-refundable. "I've seen too many brides go through with weddings they knew weren't right," she told me. "It takes courage to walk away, especially this late. The deposit is the least of your worries right now." Her kindness broke through the numbness I'd been operating under, bringing fresh tears to my eyes. Throughout the day, I discovered unexpected support from quarters I hadn't anticipated. My principal called to check on me after hearing the news, assuring me my job was secure despite rumors Jason's family might try to cause problems. Former friends I'd lost touch with during my relationship with Jason reached out with messages of support. Even Diana's personal assistant secretly texted me, "I've worked for her for 3 years. You made the right choice. Stay strong." Of course, there was backlash too. Jason's sister Kimberly posted thinly veiled comments on social media about gold diggers getting cold feet when they realize they can't meet expectations. Several couples from Jason's social circle who I'd grown friendly with unfriended me instantly. The most painful blow came when my bridesmaid Melissa, a colleague I'd thought was a good friend, texted to say she was disappointed in my immaturity and was concerned about how this reflects on the school. I later learned from Sarah that Melissa had been angling for an invitation to join the Thompsons Country Club and saw my wedding as her entry point. "Real friends stick around when the fancy parties end," Sarah told me, helping me sort through wedding gifts that needed to be returned. False ones disappear when they're no longer getting something from the relationship. In the weeks that followed, I found myself returning to my mother's letter daily. Sometimes multiple times a day. Her words became a touchstone, a reminder that I'd made the right choice, however difficult. The sapphire ring rarely left my finger. Its weight a constant reminder of the resilience in my bloodline. One evening, about 3 weeks after the canceled wedding, Grandpa found me sorting through my closet, creating a donation pile of clothes that had never really felt like me. "Spring cleaning in summer?" he asked, leaning against the doorframe. "More like identity reclamation," I replied, holding up a designer dress Jason had insisted I needed for dinners with his clients. "I don't think I've ever actually liked this dress. I just liked that Jason approved of it." Grandpa nodded thoughtfully. "Your mother went through something similar after she and your father left his family. Said she'd spent so long trying to be a Sullivan that she'd forgotten how to be a Wright." "What did she do?" "Planted a garden," he said with a smile. Said growing things helped her remember who she was. Every seed true to its nature, not trying to be anything but exactly what it was meant to be. The idea resonated deeply. I think I need my own version of Mom's garden. Over the next few months, I focused on rediscovering pieces of myself that had been suppressed during my relationship with Jason. I rejoined my old book club, resumed volunteer work at the animal shelter, and reconnected with friends I'd neglected. Each small step felt like reclaiming territory that had been ceded. In July, I made a significant decision. Using some of the money from selling my engagement ring, which Jason had demanded back but ultimately relented on after Grandpa mentioned the recordings, I booked a solo trip to Italy for the summer break, something I'd always dreamed of, but that Jason had dismissed as touristy and common. "Are you sure about traveling alone?" Grandpa asked as he helped me research accommodations. I'm sure I need to prove to myself that I can, I replied. Besides, I'll have Mom's letter with me. And I'll call you every day. 2 weeks later, I found myself sitting in a small cafe in Florence, my mother's letter carefully preserved in a plastic sleeve in my journal. The trip had already transformed me in ways I hadn't anticipated. Without Jason's constant evaluation, I found myself making choices based solely on what brought me joy, from the colorful sundress I was wearing to the third gelato of the day I was currently enjoying. "E buono?" asked an older Italian woman at the next table, gesturing to my gelato. "Delizioso," I replied, using one of the few Italian words I'd mastered. She smiled and began chatting in rapid Italian, most of which I couldn't understand. But her warmth transcended language barriers, and soon she was showing me photos of her grandchildren while I showed her pictures of my students' art projects. That encounter became emblematic of my journey, opening myself to authentic connections without worrying about social implications or strategic advantages. I met fellow travelers in hostels who became temporary companions on day trips to vineyards. I befriended a family of street musicians who taught me to play the tambourine badly but enthusiastically. I had dinner with a retired professor who shared stories of rebuilding his life after losing his wife to cancer. Each interaction reinforced what my mother had tried to tell me, that true connections aren't about perfection or performance, but about genuine sharing of ourselves. When I returned home in August, Grandpa met me at the airport, his face lighting up as I walked through the arrival gates. "You look different," he said, hugging me tightly. "I feel different," I replied. Stronger. Clearer. That evening, as we sat on our back porch watching fireflies, I shared my new plan with him. Using the remainder of the money from selling the engagement ring and some of my mother's jewelry, keeping the sapphire and pearl earrings as family treasures, I wanted to establish a small scholarship fund for girls from our town to pursue educational opportunities. "I'm thinking of calling it the Marie Sullivan Resilience Scholarship," I explained. "For young women who demonstrate courage and determination in the face of obstacles." Grandpa's eyes glistened in the porch light. "Your mother would be so proud of how you've handled all of this, Amber. Turning pain into purpose, that's the Sullivan way." As summer turned to fall and I welcomed a new class of second graders, I felt a sense of purpose and contentment that had eluded me during my relationship with Jason. The constant anxiety about measuring up, about being enough, had dissipated, replaced by a quiet confidence in my own worth. News of the Thompsons occasionally reached me. Jason had become engaged again just 4 months after our breakup, this time to the daughter of his father's business partner, a match his mother undoubtedly approved of. Rather than feeling hurt, I felt relieved that I had escaped a fate that would have slowly eroded my sense of self. One crisp October day, I was volunteering at a community garden project with my students when I noticed a tall man helping one of my second graders plant bulbs. He handled the child's endless questions with patience and genuine interest, kneeling in the dirt without concern for his genes. "That's Ms. Morgan's brother," my teaching assistant explained when she caught me watching. "Liam Parker. He just moved back to town after working abroad for several years. Something with sustainable agriculture, I think." Later, as parents arrived to collect their children, Ms. Morgan introduced us properly. Liam's handshake was firm, his smile reaching his eyes in a way that immediately put me at ease. "I hear you're the one who organized this garden project," he said. "My sister tells me you're something of a local hero to these kids." I laughed. "Hardly a hero. Just a teacher who believes in hands-on learning." "And dirt therapy," he added, gesturing to his mud-streaked clothing. "There's something honest about growing things, isn't there? No pretense. A seed either thrives or it doesn't, depending on whether it gets what it truly needs." The simplicity and truth of his statement resonated with me deeply. We talked until the garden emptied of children, discovering shared interests in sustainable living, community building, and Italian gelato. When he asked if I'd like to continue our conversation over coffee sometime, I felt a flicker of both interest and apprehension. I was still healing, still rediscovering myself. But I also recognized that healthy connections were part of that growth. I'd like that, I said. But I should warn you, I'm taking things slowly these days. Getting to know myself again before I try to get to know someone else too deeply. Instead of being put off by my honesty, he nodded with understanding. The best relationships start with two whole people anyway. I'm not going anywhere. Take all the time you need. As I walked home that evening, leaves crunching beneath my feet, I realized my mother had given me not just a warning about the wrong relationship, but the wisdom to recognize the possibility of a right one when the time came. The sapphire ring caught the late afternoon sunlight as I climbed the steps to the porch where Grandpa waited. Resilience and new beginnings indeed. 1 year after what should have been my wedding day, I stood in my classroom hanging student artwork for our end-of-year exhibition. The vibrant paintings, exuberant splashes of color representing our future dreams, covered the walls in a testament to boundless possibility. "This looks amazing," said Sarah, who had stopped by to help. "Your best exhibition yet." "The kids outdid themselves," I agreed, stepping back to survey their work. "I just gave them permission to dream big." "Something you've gotten pretty good at yourself," she observed. She wasn't wrong. The past year had been transformative in ways I couldn't have imagined on that painful day when I returned my engagement ring to Jason. What had initially felt like an ending had become the beginning of a more authentic life. My new teaching position at Pine Grove's progressive sister school allowed me to develop an arts-integrated curriculum I'd always dreamed of implementing. The Marie Sullivan Resilience Scholarship had already helped 3 young women pursue educational opportunities they otherwise couldn't have afforded. And my relationship with Grandpa Martin had deepened as we navigated this new chapter together, no longer tiptoeing around Jason's critical presence in our home. "Speaking of dreams," Sarah continued, "have you decided about the summer fellowship offer? The one in Vermont?" I nodded. "I accepted yesterday. 6 weeks developing trauma-sensitive classroom approaches at a national teaching center. Grandpa's actually talking about coming up for part of it, says he wants to explore the woodworking shops in Burlington." "And Liam?" she asked carefully. A smile tugged at my lips. "He's presenting at an agricultural conference nearby in July. Says the timing is remarkably convenient." My friendship with Liam Parker had evolved slowly over the past 8 months. From coffee conversations to community garden collaborations to hiking excursions with Grandpa joining us. Unlike my whirlwind romance with Jason, this connection had developed with thoughtful deliberation, each of us revealing ourselves in layers rather than performing versions we thought would impress the other. Just last week, as we'd walked along the riverfront at sunset, Liam had taken my hand for the first time. The gesture was simple but significant, a question rather than a claim. I'd interlaced my fingers with his, giving my answer in the same wordless, respectful language. "I like him," Sarah said, interrupting my thoughts. "He looks at you like you're a person to be discovered, not a project to be completed." "That's exactly it," I agreed. With Jason, I always felt like I was auditioning for a role I'd never quite master. With Liam, I just feel like myself. Later that evening, I sat with Grandpa on our porch swing, the same one he'd built when I was 12 and desperately missing my parents. The familiar creak of its chains provided the soundtrack to our conversation. "I have a confession to make," he said after a comfortable silence. "About your mother's letter." I touched the locket at my throat, a recent gift from Grandpa containing a tiny photo of my mother and a miniature version of her letter, carefully photographed and reduced. "What about it?" "I almost didn't give it to you that night," he admitted. "Kept thinking it wasn't my place to interfere, that maybe I was overreacting to Jason's behavior." "What changed your mind?" He sighed. "The look on your face when you came home from that rehearsal. It was the same look your mother had when she'd try to please your father's family, like she was disappearing bit by bit." He patted my hand. "Some mistakes you just can't bear to watch twice in one lifetime." "I'm glad you interfered," I told him. "That letter. It was like she reached across time just when I needed her most." "Marie always did have perfect timing," he said with a small smile. "And a knack for seeing the heart of things." I leaned my head against his shoulder, grateful beyond words for his presence in my life. "Do you think she'd be proud of me? Of the choices I've made this year?" "Without a doubt," he replied firmly. You've shown the same courage she did, choosing authenticity over convenience, growth over stagnation. The painful lessons of the past year had gradually transformed into wisdom. I'd learned that real love expands rather than constrains, that boundaries are expressions of self-respect, and that walking away from the wrong situation, however daunting, creates space for the right one to emerge. Most importantly, I discovered that resilience isn't about avoiding falls, but about rising afterward with greater self-knowledge. The sapphire ring still adorned my right hand, no longer just a family heirloom, but a personal talisman. Its deep blue caught the fading light as I twisted it thoughtfully. I used to think that happy endings meant everything working out exactly as planned, I told Grandpa. Now I understand they're more about finding peace with the unexpected paths. That's the funny thing about life, he replied. Sometimes the detours lead to better destinations than the original route ever could. As darkness settled around us and fireflies began their evening dance, I felt a profound sense of gratitude for the wedding that never happened, for the painful but necessary awakening it had triggered. My mother's words had indeed changed my future, not by providing answers, but by helping me ask the right questions. The path ahead still held uncertainty, as all futures do, but I faced it now with clear eyes and an open heart. No longer afraid of making mistakes, but confident in my ability to learn from them. Perhaps that was the most valuable inheritance my mother had left me, not the jewelry or the letter itself, but the example of a woman who had trusted herself enough to begin again. Sometimes, I realized, you have to get a little lost before you can truly find yourself. And in that discovery lies the most profound love story of all. What unexpected detour in your life has led you to a better destination? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. If this journey resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to share in more reflections on life's unexpected lessons. Thank you for walking this path with me today. And remember, sometimes the most beautiful beginnings are hiding inside what looks like an ending. Until next time, may you always have the courage to choose your authentic self.